All right, welcome back to another tutorial in Maya. Today, let's take a look at how to create a sort of a plasma vapor kind of ectoplasmic kind of effect. Now, what you'll notice here in the render view that I have going on is basically I have a fluid container and we're going to use a temperature emitter, basically just a fluid emitter that emits a temperature or heat, and we're going to create a plasmatic effect. So grab a cup of coffee because this might be a long one. I don't even know where to begin to try and describe how to reverse the process and how to work you through all of this. So it may help before you go into this tutorial to go back and watch part 1 and 2 of the fire tutorials of the 3D fluid container fire tutorials that I have. So anyway, I'm going to walk you through this anyway. There might be some stuff that you know already, but let's take a look at some of this stuff, how to create this effect. And I think the best way to describe the effect is to sort of see what's happening here. I have a 3D fluid container with a emitter, and if I rewind this animation and just hit play, basically it's just a cubicle, a cube right there that's emitting heat, and it's inside of a fluid container that's rotating around. And you'll notice where it sort of follows along the path of this this rotation. So that's cool. It's no big deal. It's really easy to set up, but there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of when you're kind of trying to tame the fire effect and move it more into the like the vapor sort of ectoplasmic range, so to speak. So anyway, I'm going to hit pause here, and let's do a quick render of what we have in this scene. There was the previous render. Let's just render this out and see what we get. And right there, I notice it's completely different than what we had before, which is cool. And I can kind of tell by just the shape of it that it's sort of moving around. It's doing its thing. It's doing all that. But what you'll notice here is a temperature difference. And this is found in the glow attributes. And we'll get more into this in a minute. We'll come back to this. But just for the moment, I want you to be aware of something that's happening in this 3D fluid container and what we're doing with our shading here. So this glow right here is something that most people probably overlook, or it gets overlooked from the start. So you need to be concentrating on this from the start, because it's going to make a big difference in, you know, how your simulations come out. So right now, if I come into the outliner, actually I want to be in the hypershade. And when you create a 3D fluid container, you actually there's a shader that comes along with this, and if you click on this shader glow, the shader glow 1, you'll notice you have some attributes that you can adjust here. Well, this makes a big difference on how the end render comes out, and it's sort of the first place to go and check before you get into doing any of this stuff is go to the shader glow, and let's check and see what's happening in here and whether or not specifically the auto exposure is chosen. So I'm going to show you what this render looks like 2 different ways. You'll notice that I changed the glow color a little bit, and that kind of gave it this, I don't know if you can see this on YouTube very well, but it gave it kind of an orange tinge to the shader up here. Now, normally by default, the glow color is set to white. So if I switch that to white, do another quick render, let's keep an eye on this area here and see what happens. You'll notice that it goes, well, yeah, it goes whacked out, okay? Now, that's even with auto exposure on. I had set this earlier for those glow settings, so really you probably just want to stick with your default glow settings for the moment. I'm not sure what they turn out to be, but generally if we're just here in the middle somewhere, maybe let's just play around with those for a few minutes. This sort of sets up the look of your shader. It sort of sets up the look of how glowy this is. So lots of stuff to play around with in the shader glow. It's something you should be aware of. For the most part, by default, just leave it where it is, and everything should be cool. But what we're looking at here too is one extreme difference with this auto exposure. If I uncheck that, and we're going to let it play here, or do a render, it has a different effect. You'll notice a lot more highlights around the edges and stuff. So really this works just like an auto exposure would on any camera. It just sort of wants to, you know, unify the overall collective picture into highlights and shadows. And so auto exposure, when that's clicked on, will automatically sort of, you know, adjust this overall brightness qualities for this shader. So that's something to be aware of. When auto exposure is off, you can now control all sorts of different other levels and really see what it's going to look like. But it'll make a big difference. Okay? So anyway, that's just a word on that. So get that in your brain before you go in here. But you can create this thing by default and go in here and change this later. So it's no big deal. Now, I think it's probably best to see what does this actually look like in a composition when you're sort of done. And in this case, I want to show you kind of how to use this effect. And I'll go ahead and push play here. I'm in After Effects right now, and ultimately you'll want to be in After Effects to do some compositing work and whatnot. So essentially I just did a quick render. Well, it wasn't quick. This ectoplasmic effect, the way it is here, took about 20 hours to render. And depending on the amount of detail and resolution you give it, it could take quite a while to render. However, there are ways around long render times with this kind of thing, and I think in terms of this, I may have set my rendering capabilities a little bit too high. And there's a couple things to look at in order to minimize our render times for stuff like this, because really what we're seeing here is a plane. And this is what I did in Maya. I'm going to let it play here for a second, but this was a fluid container with the heat emitter right here, and this was the ground plane, and here was my text. And I basically just had a spotlight up here coming straight down, and there you go. And then in After Effects, I went ahead and just added a couple of pictures and a video composite of the moon back here. So we'll let this play out for a second, and I'll walk you through that. All right, I'm going to turn off. Here's the light. I did add a light, but that's in After Effects. But let's just look at what I have going on here. Right now I have the moon in the background, and I have this layer right there is the cityscape, and this right there is just sort of like a wall, okay? And this was my original starting point for this this ectoplasmic effect. So you can see where we're going on there. Have nice shadows that show up on your ground plane. Those are just normal shadows that are cast. And yeah, it kind of looks like that. But ultimately, you want to take one of these fluid effects and move it into a composite. And essentially, that's what I've done in After Effects to just sort of show you the overall composition. So that's cool. Now, let's take a look at in After Effects. Instead of adding an animated light in Maya, I added a light in After Effects. I converted my image plane into a 3D layer right here. That's the image sequence. And then this little guy right here is a light that's sort of being cast down onto the scene. So being that it's a composite, it works really well, you know, just to sort of fake things a little bit. So there it is. All right, well, let's get started. Out of After Effects, let's get back into Maya and take a look at the scene. I think what we'll do, I'm going to come back to this scene because I already have a lot of starting points, and I think I'm going to get you set up so you can get to this point. So I'm going to save my scene here, and let's do that. And let's just open up a new scene. So for you, go to a new scene, and right away, get into your Dynamics menu set, come up to your Fluid Effects, grab a 3D container, and just click on that. By default, you're going to get this. All right. So let's just leave it like that for the moment. And we're going to create an emitting like surface. So in this case, I like to pick a cube, or I like the cube because it lets us it lets us have some angles to have the fluids sort of interact with. If it were a sphere, it would pretty much just be a spherical type of emission. So in this case, I might want to go to my shaded mode, take a quick look at that, maybe tool around the scene here, and yeah, I think what I'll do is move everything up. So I'm going to press W on the keyboard, move everything up, grab it and move it up. All right, and let's take a quick view there, and maybe let's move just the cube down. I think we'll just bring this guy down here a little bit, and maybe up a little bit. And right away, what I think I'll do is just set an animated property to our fluid. And it's best now if you have your outliner open. Grab your outliner, look for your fluid 1. I'm going to click on my fluid 1. There it is. And let's actually set the properties of that to rotate. So with that selected, come over here, maybe come up here into the corner and get into your attributes, and let's look at the right here. Let's rotate it on its x-axis. I believe that's x. If not, just check it out. There it is. There's our x. And let's see, I'm going to hit we're going to keyframe this to just do a 360. So grab it right there and go to key selected at 0. And then actually we want to bring this up to about maybe 500 frames or so. Make sure you're at 500 frames. Bring it to the end of the animation there. And let's change this value to 360 degrees, positive or whatever. And just hit a key selected. Now, that should put our fluid container in motion, which is great. Now, let's do this. Let's actually come over here to this object and give it the same kind of properties. Maybe skew it a little bit to begin with, just like that. And then go ahead and with your cube selected, let's rotate. Go ahead and select all of your rotation and translation, and just put a key selected on those. Right mouse click, key selected. There you go. And let's bring it to the end up here, and maybe just keyframe it so that it rotates a little bit, sort of like that, and maybe like that. Just something random. Go ahead and set a key, and now everything should be spinning. We should have some various spinning elements, and there we go. We've got like a box within a box, and that's cool. Now let's come back here to the beginning, and let's now attach. I'm going to go into my shaded mode because I like to see my lines there. Let's attach this object to this fluid shape to tell that this 3D fluid container that, hey, I now have a heat emitting source in here. So we'll select the object first, then select your fluid container, come to your fluid effects, and in this case we want to add and edit the contents, and we want to emit something from the object. So go ahead and click on your options. You're going to come up with a little window. You can give this a name. I'll just leave it as Cube Emitter 1, maybe, something like that. And it's a surface emitter, which is what we want. We want stuff to come off the surface. And in this case, if you come over here and do your reset, I usually reset the tool, and that way I can tell what's going on here. We're not messing with density really at the moment at all with this, so we'll hit 0. We are going to do some heat. We want this thing to emanate some heat, so I'll just set it at a default of 10 maybe. And the fuel, we're not doing anything with fuel. We just want this to emit heat because that's all we need. And everything should be good. We'll go ahead and hit apply and close. And go ahead and take a play. Nothing happens. That's no big worry. Let's go and fix that real quick. At this point, you might want to bring your outliner open again. And let's go back to that fluid shape and maybe go back to our tab section up here. Okay, get to your tabs. And here we got our fluid shape. And let's look at this first. We want the vapors to escape out the top. So let's just switch that up, our boundary Y to a negative. That lets our vapors escape and kind of work their way toward the top. And let's switch our temperature, which is what we were working with to begin with. Let's set that temperature to a dynamic grid because we want to see everything that's happening in here. And let's do that. And now you may as well come on down, drop down all of your menus down here so you can see what's going on. Open up every section here because we're going to go over them one by one and just take a quick look at what we can do with these. In this case, I want to see what's happening with the heat coming off of this object. So I'm going to go ahead and enable velocity draw and set it to the beginning of the animation. And now these arrows are going to tell us kind of what's happening inside of here. You can see where the arrows are pointing in the direction of how the heat or ectoplasm or vapor is going to be escaping this container. So that's cool. That's exactly what we want. And I think for this, we may switch over here to kind of a side view. All right. So yeah, so everything is kind of working in tandem. There's a lot of swirling and stuff going on in there, and we can change that a little bit and refine it a little bit later, but for right now, let's just leave it. And there you go. So at this point, you should have something like this, basically just an object in a box, and they're both rotating. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my original file, and let's see, recent files, I think it was this one, and I'm not going to save those. Okay, now I'm back into, basically the defaults where I started with mine, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to choose, our fluid shape here, and I want to work you up to this point. You have velocity draw on, and that's basically showing us what the simulation looks like. But it's not necessarily how it actually looks. We're just basically seeing, all of these things happening. So now we want to mess around with some of the properties inside of the shading elements in order to kind of get a better idea of, where we're going with this. So you might want to come down and let's see here. I'm going to sort of show you some starting points that I have set up here in this fluid shape, okay? And you might be able to set yours, accordingly. So right now we're at as render on our shaded display, and the boundary draw is set to bottom, and that basically just shows us the bottom of the grid here. And in the dynamic simulation, I left everything at default values, so you can see where those are just sort of default values all the way down the line here. And in the density section, here is my scale. It's at like 0.500, buoyancy is at 1, and the rest are at 0. Velocity, I brought the swirl up a little bit, so I'm at about 3.3 on the swirl, and that basically just adds a little bit of swirling motion to this container. And turbulence, I sort of pumped up the turbulence a little bit, gave it a little tiny bit of frequency and a little bit of speed. My temperature scale right now is at like 0.802, and I have a negative buoyancy on here right now, and that may or may not make a difference with what you're doing. You can play around with this value quite a bit depending on what you're doing. So anyway, I'm right around 1, whether it's positive 8 or positive 0.8 or negative 0.8. Essentially it means about 1. So it just matters because that'll be the direction that the influencing direction of the buoyancy. Okay, anyway, don't worry about that for a moment. Dissipation, I have a little bit of that on, a little bit of diffusion, a little bit of turbulence, a little bit of noise, a little bit of tension. Okay, so that's the temperature section, and that's pretty cool for there. Now, what is really going to be the important part of most everything that you do here, is your environment, your shading. And if you come down here and look at your shading area, this is really important because you want to set your transparency to a really dark gray, maybe, to start, and set your color to black right here. And then play around with your incandescent values and your opacity values. I've set both of these to temperature. Actually, all of these are set to temperature, and that's really going to give us a preview of what's happening in here. So in order to do that, I'm going to come back up and get rid of velocity draw. I'm just going to turn that off. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so now we can just see our basic emitter in there. And there you go. So let's go back down here for a second. As you can see, I have messed with this value over here for my incandescent values. By default, you probably have like a flame looking kind of thing with some reds and some blues and some greens, but what you want to do is really change these incandescent values to something, you know, something different that doesn't look like fire. And in this case, this does not look like fire. So you can add points in here, as many points as you want. Like if I come in here, I might be able to say, well, let's add a point, like just maybe something right in there. And you know, oh, no, let's throw it way off. Let's take this and add like maybe a yellow, and really kind of a deep yellow, bright yellow. Now let's take another quick render here. This basically shows up in the middle of the spectrum, so you can see by adding just a point of yellow in there, which is completely different from all of these, that you know, you get something kind of different. So what you want to do is just mess around with your opacity level a bit until you find where, you know, it's going to be the best for what your, you know, shading qualities are, or your incandescent values. And you know, you can always bring your incandescent values up or down a bit, bias them either toward the bottom end or actually affect more of the ones on the top end. On this, I think I'll just leave it at you know, roughly there. And instead of having this on the outside, a nice color, I might want to add a purple in there. So let's say we choose this color and switch it up to maybe like a purple or something. And I'll take another quick render. All right, well, you can see what that does. It really messes with it. It doesn't really do much. So let's go back here and take that back to, say, like a greenish color in there. And let's see what happens. And you know, at this point, you may want to look over here at what's happening. Instead of in your render view, keep an eye on what's happening inside of your viewport, and you know, play around with the different values you know, in there. So I just pump those up from the input bias, and we get a totally different looking render. All right, something like that. So it's really all about fine-tuning at this point, and you know, sort of looking at what your incandescent values are and how everything is looking in here. And remember, this is something that is sort of cold. We don't want too much heat emanating from there. So you know, just sort of be aware of that in the overall simulation. You're thinking cold. You're thinking not quite as explosive, you know, not quite as buoyant, you know, a bit of dissipation, not a lot of turbulence, but some. And the temperature scale, you know, you can either bring that up or down. I'll try whacking it out here all the way up like that, and see what we get. Okay, so there it is now. So anyway, you get the idea. You're going to do a lot of fine-tuning through these little properties. And don't forget about your emitter, because this emitter right in here has properties that, you know, basically you're starting off with. You can raise your, since we're working with heat right now, you could raise this heat up of the emitter a bit through there. You could set your density up a bit from here. anything that has to do with this emitter, you can control a little bit more inside of here. So yeah, for the most part, that's kind of what you should be playing around with, is just trying to get an ectoplasmic effect inside of that fluid container. Now, here's something to be aware of. I'll go ahead and let that go like that for a sec. Let's do a quick render. I'm going to come back to my fluid shape, and let's take a look at the light properties for a second, because those are pretty important as well. I'm going to come down here and sort of say move my bias down a bit, and I'm going to do a quick render, kind of see where that's at. Alright, so now I have a quick render here, and you'll notice that here's the shader. It's looking cool. Look at all those nice shadows we have. And I have basically one spotlight in this scene, and there's just a single spotlight. And let's take a look at that real quick. I'm going to come over here and let's get into our outliner and choose that spotlight. And you'll notice the intensity is pumped up a little bit. I have a little bit of a cone angle up there. I raised the penumbra a little bit and gave it a little bit of a drop off, so no big deal. But remember, take a look at what your light is doing. In this case, I'm not using depth map shadows. I am using ray trace shadows. And ray trace is really cool with these because it gives it a really nice looking shadow down there. And yeah, so I raised the light radius up a little bit, gave myself some, midline shadow rays, and the depth limit up a little bit. And that's about it. So anyway, that's as simple as you get at the moment. So let's take a look at a couple of other things. Let's see here. There's so much to this. Fluids in general are self-lit, meaning that you have some various properties to work with when you're working with this fluid container. So in terms of lighting, it's self-lit, or you can actually use your real lights to change things. Now, before I get into that, remember that you can bring your shading quality up when you do renders. This will help your fluid look a little better in here. And remember about your resolutions up here. Right now, I'm at a base resolution of 40, and the size of my container is 10, 10, and 10 right there. But if I really wanted to add more resolution, I may or may not need it. I could go ahead and hit 80, and let's take another quick render, and there you go. So remember those. You want to get a good look on this stuff, so remember about your resolutions. Okay, back onto lights. Let's go down here to the bottom. Let's get down here and look at a couple of different things in the lighting section. You'll notice you have self-shadow and real lights. Now, the self-shadow is interesting because it basically, there's a built-in light inside this fluid container, which is basically just a directional light pointing straight down. And that's one thing, so be aware of that. And then you have that will self-shadow, but you really don't want to have real lights on and self-shadow at the same time necessarily, one or the other. And in this case, my real lights, basically I'm rendering without real lights, and let's see how long these two renders take. I'm going to do it without real lights, and I think I'll just take my self-shadow off too there for a second. So play around with your render times between these two versions, and you'll notice where that went really fast. And that was probably my problem of why it took 20 hours to render out this fluid before, is because I had left this real lights on. Now, if I go ahead and click on real lights here, let's take a look at how long that's going to take to render. Okay, noticeably different amount of time. You can see where by having real lights on, it's going to take a kind of a long time to render this. And Yeah, so be aware of that. There's a trade-off. If you use real lights, it's going to take much longer if you use the lights in the scene. Now, if you were just to choose no real lights, well, then it wouldn't take quite as long as, well, it's almost instantaneous as opposed to, waiting through this. So that's the big mistake there that'll happen. And, be aware of that. And as you can see, it's still rendering. So I'm going to hit escape. All right. And I'm going to take that real lights off. And I'm going to look at this. This looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. But let's see what happens when real lights are off. This thing renders like almost immediately. And there's not really a quality hit. I don't notice too much quality being lost there at all. So anyway, that's the deal there. All right. So let's take a quick breather here and sort of look at. Let's see. I wanted to show you something too. Let's see. Let me get Maya out of the way there. Let me come on here. Let me hide our After Effects. Let me see if I can find. I was going to show you something. Let's see what that's all about. There he is, Lester. Just for a quick break, if you ever need to go and learn some new stuff about CG, check out Lester Banks. He has all these cool tutorials, either in Maya, After Effects, which both these go hand in hand. And he trolls the internet night and day to find good CG tutorials and stuff. He is dedicated to your brain and finding you good things to put in it. Okay, so check out Lester Banks because he's cool. All right, now let's go back to here and let's go back to Maya for a second. That's sort of the end result of what we're looking at. And I think we've covered quite a few things, except for the fact that when you want to do something, as far as your object in here, right now you probably have a cube in here. Well, I have a cube too as well. And if I come over here and say, look at my hypershade, let's see if I can find my hypershade here. Let's go to our hypershade. And here it is. I have a Lambert 2 right here. And that Lambert 2 is basically just a transparent color. And that's attached to my cube. Now, if I brought that transparency level down, you'd notice there's the cube behind there. So that's what that's all about. So that's how you disguise that. And then you have fluid shape drop off in case you're getting too much of a fluid, like a cubicle look. If you go to your fluid 1 and take a look at your fluid 1, well, actually no. You'd want to actually look at your cube. And let's see what's happening. That's an emitter, and it has that transparent surface attached to it. But if I look in here, let's see here. I want to be looking at the render stats for this cube. You'll notice where, because this is a temperature emitter, we don't really want the shape of this cube to be casting shadows. Even if it has a transparent, sort of shader on there, you kind of want to take the cast shadows off and receive shadows, because really it's not important that this casts or receives shadows in this case. And if this were casting a shadow, it would block that spotlight and then throw a hard, cubicle shadow down there. All right. Okay. There you go. I hope that this has been informative, and remember, you could go back and watch the part 1 and part 2 of the 3D fluid container for creating like an explosion, and that'll probably give you even more pointers on this system. But it's really a cool thing. These fluid containers are real versatile. And remember that this heat emitting object that we have set up right here can only be emitting heat and interacting with this as long as it's inside of this fluid emitter. So if you were to bring this over here and then make it pass through this cube, you'll see that it emanates heat while it's passing through, but once it gets to the other side, this cube won't have any more effect. Okay? So there you go. Those are the things to be aware of as you're working with this ectoplasmic vaporous effect. And man, can't believe we got through it. So go practice that for a week or two or a month or whatever. Enjoy it, have fun with it, and yeah, thanks for stopping in. As always, be a good person, read a book, and you know, just do the best you can every day for yourself and others. All right. Take care, and I can't wait for the next one.